Chapter 28. Hold tight, Colin. I see her. That was one inaccuracy per sentence. He actually couldn't see her as such, but he was keenly aware of the presence of another dragon homing in on them with focused intent. It was by the same suite of dragon-related powers that he was affixed firmly to Iziro's back, obviating the need to actually hold on, which was good, as she was simply too large and overall smooth for there to be anything he could grip. The mountain reared up before them, the huge timekeeper doorway aglow in the falling dusk with its inset to megalass decorations. All around, the peaks were stained orange and crimson by the setting sun, and the forest in the valley below was already lost to shadow. Whatever complaints he might have had, Colin could not deny that his strange new life kept showing him new vistas of incredible beauty. And then Vedalshi came plummeting out of the cloud bank directly overhead, diving right at them with her wings folded back and all four talons extended. He couldn't even guess what she was trying to accomplish. He could sense her intent as clearly as her presence, and it was pure high-spirited mischief, as when she'd buzzed him and Emir Alafin previously. Presumably she didn't think she could actually land a hit on Iziro. She had to know what the consequences of that would be. Fortunately, this proved to be the case. The much larger black dragon effortlessly flipped into a barrel roll, managing to swoop adroitly around Vedalshi in the split second she was passing through the space where they had been. The green snapped her wings out, attempting to check her descent, but having repositioned herself directly above, Iziro pumped her own wings in a powerful blow augmented by magic. This, of course, sent her and Colin shooting skyward, but also slammed a wall of pure kinetic force straight down at Vedalshi. The younger dragon emitted a strangled squawk as she was smacked right out of the sky and plunged into the forest below. It was enough of a distance that seconds passed before Colin distantly heard the heavy impact, complete with supplementary sounds of crunched trees and the shrieking of displaced birds. "You guys don't play gently, do you?" he asked aloud as Iziro banked, spiraling downward toward the landing outside the lair. She snorted derisively. "I assure you, husband, that was gentle. If I reprimanded the brat hard enough to actually dissuade her, it would cause undesirable tension with her mother. Emir Alafin is in the same boat. Life around here became substantially more annoying the day Vedalshi figured that out." They all ate on the platform, her landing so skillful he barely felt the vibration. There she paused, tilting her head to study the door before entering. Colin had to crane his neck to see past hers, but after a moment of this Iziro seemed to realize his predicament and obligingly re-angled herself to give him an unimpeded view. Two soldiers of the Phantom Legion stood guard to either side of the door. They were clearly spectral, though the glow of the surrounding megalass obscured the faint luminosity he remembered them possessing. For the moment their exposed faces appeared skeletal, with only occasional flickers of the shape of a fully fleshed head around them. And the odd position they were holding, what was, Colin belatedly recognized the gesture as the salute their commander had given him previously. They must have done that upon their arrival, he just hadn't been positioned to see it. "Thank you," he said aloud, trying to the solemn yet off-handed demeanor he'd seen high-ranking government functionaries use toward honor guards back home in Rivkabit. "As you were." Both ghosts immediately snapped back to proper attention, thumping the butts of their spears once against the flagstones and then going completely immobile. On death, Colin reflected, probably did much to improve one's ability to stand still. Iziro grunted in a pensive tone, then finally stepped forward into the towering corridor. He could already see the fruits of their labor here. Previously, this access passage had been liberally strewn with trash, muss, and cobwebs. It was now utterly pristine, as spotless as if every inch had been polished. But even that was nothing compared to what awaited them at the end. They emerged into the cavernous main chamber of the lair, and Iziro came to a halt, slowly swiveling her long neck to gaze around in silence. Colin couldn't blame her. The place was unrecognizable. It had previously fallen into such a state of decay that a thorough cleaning had changed the very shape of it. Gone was the sea of bones, leaving behind a clean expanse of time-stone floor with its decorative engravings revealed. There were, Colin observed, bands of temestile set into the floor, separating the relatively plain stonework from the large sections which had been laid out in geometric murals. Also gone was the centuries-deep layer of moss, mildew, dust, and cobwebs which had climbed up the walls and even across the ceiling, and aside from the cleanliness, the best part was that this entire huge chamber was generously embellished with tamaglass inlay, which was now unobscured and glowed vividly. Warm, clean radiance filled the space, as much a contrast to its previous dimness as the spotlessness was to its former filth, bringing out the golden hues of timestone and temestile that made it look like a completely different room from the grey cavern of before. Even the sounds were clearer, less muffled. Water flowed merrily through channels in the floor which had been entirely covered by ancient bone piles, and inset gears and pipes revealed through decorative apertures in the walls clicked and hissed steadily away, sounding clearer and, Colin thought, faster than they had been. He particularly appreciated that the stink of ancient decay was gone. A thump echoed from outside while they stood, taking it in, followed by the heavy clatter of huge claws upon timestone, and she came trotting into the room from behind them, clearly none the worse for wear and apparently not even annoyed about her recent comeuppance. "I know, right?" she said cheerfully. "I gotta hand it to you, Pants, your crazy idea paid off nicely. I mean, look at this place. Holy crap, we've got lights." Isaiah turned to give her a disdainful look, which the younger dragon affected not to notice. She was too busy scampering forward to the middle of the floor, where she actually began capering about, spinning in circles and pouncing like a puppy, as if to revel in the newfound abundance of floor space. If their arrival hadn't done it, that was apparently enough to alert the other occupants of the household to their return. Two pointed heads on long necks emerged from their respective doorways, well above ground level. "Husband, Isaiah," Tevathyris greeted them calmly, dipping her head once. "Welcome back." "Ah, you've returned," Imaralafine said in a far more brusque tone. "I trust your errand was successful." "Our part in the task is done," Isaiah agreed. "The next steps will require your help in particular, Imaralafine. And there has been an additional complication." Imaralafine snorted. "Oh. I suppose I should not be surprised that you couldn't manage to handle it yourself." Isaiah lifted her head, and Colin didn't wait to hear her rebuttal. "Ladies," he said sharply. "Peace, please. I've only just returned home, and I don't need to hear bickering. I would ask how things have gone here, but I can see for myself. Any problems?" "HMPH," Imaralafine sniffed as Fenurixa poked her head into the room from behind her. Yes, fine. I do say, husband, I have not become accustomed to having these horrible little gremlins running around my home. That will take more than a couple of days. I'm compelled to admit that they managed not to get in the way, though." There were indeed phantom soldiers stationed throughout the room, a pair of them bracketing every door and standing rigidly at attention. To demonstrate her point, Imaralafine flicked at the nearest with her tail. The ghost evaded her without effort, not moving as a person would, but flowing aside in a puff of mist, then returning to his post. "Well, don't harass them, please," Colin said, struggling to contain his exasperation. "The ability of good troops to work around your needs is a trait to be appreciated, not tested for your amusement." "Yes, quite," Tevathyris agreed. "I confess I am not entirely sanguine about this use of the souls of soldiers, but one cannot impugn results. The change in here is incredible, particularly in how quickly it was achieved. After all, the dead need no rest. And, it must be said, the enslaved don't need their morale managed." The sensation Colin experienced wasn't quite a headache, not in the physical sense. But it was something. Right between and behind his eyes, the inexorably building pressure that came from having to manage these beings whose awesome power was exceeded only by their egos. The must in that sentence was carrying a lot of weight, Phenorexa commented. Did that truly need to be said? Tiavatharis swiveled her neck around to stare at her, parting her jaws as if in preparation to hiss or bite. Imaralafine, in reaction, reared up to her full height, baring her own teeth. Colin released the hold, affixing him to Iziro's back and teleported it right into the middle of them. She's right, he stated, locking eyes with Tiavatharis. Not that her sniping is helpful or particularly smart, but the observation itself was correct. If the Phantom Legion don't enjoy their situation, well, that would have been something for them to consider before they abandoned their oaths and country. And I would like this to be the last time we have this specific discussion, please. I will always hold your counsel in the highest esteem, Tiavatharis, and I hope you will not hesitate to offer it, when you have something new or useful to contribute. This argument can only end with me reminding the Legion out loud of what they did. They are already being adequately punished, and I don't think they deserve to have their noses rubbed in it any further. Unless something new comes up, drop it. It shall be as you say, husband. Far from anger at being thus shot down, Tiavatharis smiled broadly and dipped her neck to him in a deep gesture of submission. I appreciate the wisdom of your position. And you? He pointed at Phenorexa. Just shut up. Next time you feel an urge to rile up one of your siblings or aunts, go read a book instead. The blue dragon spread her wings, dipped her head, and crossed one foreleg before the other in an elaborate six-limb variant of a curtsy. I hear and obey, O my lord and master. All things shall transpire according to your will, as it is written. Can you maybe hear and obey a bit less sarcastically? He asked wearily. Pick your battles, husband, Izira murmured, lowering her head to his level from behind so he could see her smile. Right, yes. And speaking of battles, Commander. The leader of the Phantom Legion materialized right before him, luminous ectoplasm forming in a cloud in the air and then coalescing into his form. Silent as always, he saluted. Fine work, Colin praised. Your troops are to be commended. I apologize for anything my family did to hamper you, which I'm sure at least some of them did. Anything to report? The commander held up one hand and, in another drift of glittering blue dust, a sheet of parchment appeared in his grasp. He held it up facing Colin, who started to reach for it but then drew back. It seemed to be part of the commander's physical essence, what there was of it. Instead he leaned forward, squinting. Ah. I don't suppose you can write in VE. Here, let me. Phenorexa paced over to him, sticking her long nose over his shoulder to peer at the ghostly parchment. As I thought, this is in classical Darashi. It's a mission report. There were no intrusions during your absence, the Legion had no need to consult with your consorts for orders, and they found and scouted a deep cave system which is now being used for refuse disposal. Soldiers were sent all the way to the bottom to verify it is not magically active or inhabited before they started throwing bones in there. Well, this was going to be interesting. Are there any language primers on Darashi in the library? Of course there are, Phenorexa sniffed, pulling back the scowl reproachfully at him. Just what sort of 2-bit operation do you think we're running, here? That is the personal library of Imaralafine the White Wind. Perfect. Then I guess I know what my new hobby will be, Colin said with a sigh. Why did everything have to be so arbitrarily difficult? Clearly the legionaries could understand his verbal orders. He supposed it was understandable that they couldn't speak out loud, but why couldn't they just write in VE or Felvalin? Oh, well, learning languages was fun and gratifying, and he'd not had the opportunity to pursue any in a while. Maybe he should bone up on the peculiarities of necromancy while he was in there. Thank you, Commander, good work. And now that the place is cleaned enough to see them. Does anybody know what these do? He gestured, and the various dragons swiveled their head to look, including Venomax, who had just emerged from Iziro's chambers looking surly as usual. Now that he could see them plainly, Colin was able to count 8 distinct timekeeper devices displayed in here. In fact, they were laid out in 2 neat rows lining the central path up toward the Traximos's, chambers. Varying in size from an obelisk just shorter than column packed with whirring gears to an interlocking set of slowly rotating temestial rings that rose almost 2 stories tall and half as wide, they were clearly not fastened to the floor, but had been brought here and set down. "If we did, husband, they'd be in use," Imam Alafin answered. Offensive as the statement may be to archaeologists, when you've seen one inscrutable timekeeper machine, you've sort of seen them all. The only thing you really can do with the ones that provide this kind of perpetual motion is hook them up to modern cogworks as a source of motive force, but none of us are interested in that kind of tinkering. Otherwise, they are basically just decorative. I see. And? Why are they all out here? Useless or not, timekeeper artifacts are extremely valuable. I'm astonished that none of you have them squirreled away in your hoards. Or that Atraximos didn't, for that matter. These were uncovered by collective effort, Isaiah explained, grinning. We've long since extricated anything portable and interesting from the ancient city. These are the specimens about which there was some dispute of ownership. Atraximos grew tired of the ensuing discussions and decreed they would be displayed out here in the common area. I was about to have the Legion move them somewhere out of the way, but I can see the sense in that arrangement. Well, they make pretty good conversation pieces, anyway. Very well, then, Commander, never mind. You have your duties. I will summon you when I have additional orders. Dismissed. The ghost saluted again and dissolved into a puff of glowing mist. Well, look at you, Vadaril, she commented, grinning hugely. Playing plans and barking orders. Where's all that courtly diffidence from before? You're like a whole different pair of pants. I see someone has been encouraging him, Imam Alafin commented, but she did so with a smile. As is no less than a wife's duty, Isaiah said primly. Fenurax snorted. To have gotten him this spicy in just a couple of days, she must have encouraged his brains out. Vadaril, she cackled madly. Venomax rolled his eyes, turned, and silently stalked back into his mother's chambers, tail lashing behind him. Probably for the best. Colin was trying something, based on Isaiah's comments about what dragons like in a mate, and so far, it seemed to be working. Even Imam Alafin had not taken exception to his assertive demeanor. Tiavathyris was actually giving him what he might have interpreted as bedroom eyes, though it was a bit hard to parse that expression on her currently reptilian face. Could that be? Was that really all she'd wanted? Colin dismissed the idea. It was surely a piece of the puzzle, but there was no way it was that simple. More to the point, the one likely exception to this rule of draconic behavior was Venomax. Colin had already established dominance there, as firmly as possible, and reinforcing that was only going to widen the rift. He needed, or at least wanted to come to some accord with Venomax, but he had little idea how to even begin. That was really the last major sticking point, in terms of his relationships with the family. Even the other 2 drakes, while they both had difficult personalities in their own ways, weren't nakedly hostile toward Colin. Actually, he thought they both might like him on at least some level. With dragons, it could be hard to tell. Imam Alafin, he said aloud, I need your expertise. Of course you do, she replied, managing to look condescending and flattered at the same time. I believe Isaiah mentioned that, in fact. Very well, what's gone wrong? On our way out of the city, we were approached by a priest of. Which one was it? He turned to Isaiah. The Avervil's pantheon is kind of outside of my sphere of expertise. Ooh, you have expertise? Vadaril, she cooed mockingly. Tiavathyris smacked her away with a wing. Anathema, Isaiah explained, commonly known as the shepherd. She is goddess of. Well, a discussion of comparative theology wouldn't be germane, so. For all intents and purposes, you may think of the shepherd as the goddess of perseverance, Imam Alafin interrupted. Isaiah is right, there are deep nuances and a priest of the flock could go into more detail, but in essence she embodies the spirit to keep one's head down and survive no matter what befalls. Small wonder her faith became the largest organized religion in the Vales, with Atraximos darkening the skies. Why, what's she done now? You met a priest? The priest offered herself to Isiroa, Colin explained. Venomex's head poked out of the doorway, wearing a frown. As Phenorexa tilted her own head, blinking. You mean sexually? That would be a very strange move for a priest of the flock, Imaralafine mused. As a sacrifice, Isiroa clarified, flicking her tail in annoyance. She seemed to be under the impression she was about to die if I accepted. A sacrifice? Tiavatharis narrowed her eyes to slits. To you? None of us have ever demanded such, but I should think you would be the least likely to be approached for that purpose. Thank you, Isiroa replied, nodding deeply to her. Yes, that was my response as well. Obviously, the point of most immediate concern is that Anassima detected my presence and felt the need to respond, but while we are on the topic, I must ask, have any of you been demanding sacrifices from the local mortals? The dragons blinked and frowned, glancing about at one another in uncertainty. One by one, they all turned their heads to stare at Imaralafine. What? Seriously? She slapped her tail against the floor in rising irritation. When would I have done such a thing? I never leave here. And more importantly, why? There's nothing to be proved by such barbarism. Even Atraximos never indulged in that particularly stupid vice. That is what I thought, said Isiroa. Then we are left with questions and no answers. One answer seems simple enough, said Tiavatharis. Anassima may never have reacted to you or any of us before, but then, no one has ever visited one of her cities in the company of a godling. Colin heaved a sigh. I figured that was probably it. Well, hell's uncounted, our grace period might have ended a lot earlier than we'd hoped. Whether or not they know Atraximos is gone, at least one of the gods now knows I'm here. They already knew that, husband, Imaralafine pointed out. Gods seldom explain themselves, even to their mortal followers. Especially to their mortal followers. Gratuitously, obstreperously mysterious beings, ever one of them. They are almost as bad as dragons, Phenorexa said solemnly, and ducked to one side when her mother swiped at her with a wing. Anassima and the other three noticed you during your apotheosis, remember, Imaralafine continued. They apparently expected you to perish in the process, as most would-be godlings do. Since you have not, and are living right on their doorstep, so to speak, it stands to reason that the four of them will be curious what you're up to. Well, this is annoying, but it need not be a crisis. We'll simply have to come up with a way to reassure them that Colin isn't going to disrupt the local power structure. Tiavatharis cleared her throat. He created a power vacuum by destroying Atraximos the Dread, and is establishing himself as a new deity with a dragon-aligned aspect, from an unassailable seat of power, at the head of a family of dragons. Colin, and by extension this family as a whole, is definitely going to upend the local power structure. Then the task is to convince the gods to work with rather than against us, Isiroa mused. That will not be a small undertaking, but it need not be necessarily impossible. Pants is the smoothest mortal I've ever met, Vadaril, she agreed. If anyone can schmooze the gods, it's him. He's mostly a big flirt, Phenorexa commented. Might not be wise to try that on Anassima. She's married to the huntsman. Are they actually married, or is that just a religious fable? Vadaril, she countered. That's actually an interesting question. Whichever was the case originally, the nature of gods and their relationships to magic and the belief of their followers. Isiroa loudly cleared her throat. As we have already established, this is not the time for a digression into theology. Colin can brush up on that later. For now, the other matter at hand is his food supply. We acquired the first shipment while in Boisford. He has his in that bag of holding. That will give us roughly 2 weeks to make arrangements for deliveries. Did you not make arrangements with these merchant contacts of yours while in the city? T-Avathars asked pointedly. Of course, Izaroa retorted, but I obviously couldn't have them deliver bi-weekly shipments of foodstuffs here. I have a small cottage in the Boisvard hinterlands to which I've had merchants deliver things before. It's easy enough to visit surreptitiously. I have done so many a time. Oh, let me guess, Vadaril, she said sourly. That's gonna be our job from now on. Sounds easier than hunting, said Fenorexa. Hunting is fun. Her sister snapped. We are dragons. Do you fancy being demoted to a beast of burden? That would be problematic anyway, Colin cut in. If one of the gods, and therefore probably all four, have their eyes on us, I wouldn't trust any amount of stealth to get one of you to and from a dedicated drop point at regular intervals. That is a risk, Izaroa agreed. We can probably get away with it once or twice, but it would require the magical skill of one of us three, not something the kids could pull off. Hey, I can go invisible. Vadaril, she protested. That's basic magic, you don't need to be insulting. Child, hush, T-Avathars scolded. I think Colin is right, regardless, Izaroa continued. It is riskier than my other idea. Oh, I'm sure this will be rich, Imaralafine scoffed. In fact, I rather think you will like it, Izaroa said, smirking at her. It gives you your favorite thing, a chance to show off. Ah, you want magic done? The white dragon visibly preened, arching her neck proudly. Very well, it stands to reason you would call upon my skill, then. Anything you can imagine, be assured I can do. What is your grand plan? Let me guess, you want to cast a mind-controlling charm over your merchants to have them bring supplies right here and then forget everything they've seen. Of all the convoluted, why would that be your first thought? Izaroa demanded, exasperated. No, obviously I meant the simplest answer. We simply need you to create a teleportation portal linking the drop point to our lair. Oh. Imaralafine's expression soured and she lashed her tail. Well, then. No, I can't do that. Chapter 29. Izaroa snorted in such intense exasperation that she produced a puff of flame. Vadaril, she immediately mimicked the gesture, and then before she had a chance to evade, T-Avathars grabbed her right behind the head with one talon and pushed her to the floor, shifting her whole weight to stand on her neck. Oh, are you dissatisfied? Imaralafine snapped, flaring her wings aggressively. Since you're the expert, by all means. Go set up your own portal network. Do let me know how that goes. Peace. Colin exclaimed as multiple dragons around him swelled up, raising wings and heads in a prelude to some exchange that was certain not to be constructive. Imaralafine, can you please explain the problem with setting up a portal such as she described? It seems like the simplest solution to me. Everyone else, kindly bear with my ignorance and let her talk. Thank you, husband, Imaralafine said, raising her head proudly. Finally, a voice of reason. Ahem. If you were to ask which is the most difficult kind of magic to learn, there are two answers. One is that it depends entirely on the manner of learning and one's available resources, and that different systems of magic enacted by different gods are such an apples and oranges comparison to begin with that any magical specialist will have to forge multiple pacts with multiple deities relevant to their personal focus, meaning that no two mages will end up with precisely the same package of spells, and all magical comparison is thus a pointless exercise. In short, the premise of the question itself is invalid. The second answer is portal magic. Okay, he prompted, because Imaralafine was clearly the type of speaker who thrived on attention and engagement, and he knew how to handle those. Frankly, Colin could have done with a bit more focus and a lot less poetic pontificating, but as long as she got there in the end he could live with it. Go on. In the case of the simplest teleportation, Imaralafine lectured, one is either dissolving a target into their component atoms, converting those to energy, transferring them instantaneously across space, and reassembling them perfectly at the destination, without killing the subject, or warping space itself to bring 2 points together and then boring a hole in reality between them. In either case, the process involves an enormous amount of math which must be executed with absolute precision, and the consequences of the slightest error are utterly catastrophic. You begin to see, husband, why we are so taken aback by your ability to teleport, T.H.OARD added. It's not that we haven't seen such feats before. It is that you do it by pure instinct, with no apparent understanding of what is happening. I see, he said gravely. Colin's first thought, which he of course kept to himself, was that this wasn't very compelling. He had a suspicion that if one laid out in granular terms the physical details of what any magical effect was doing, they would sound equally impossible. Wasn't that the point of magic? But, as he suspected, Imar-Alafin was far from done explaining. Those are only the most basic details. Using either method, one must additionally account for the nature of space itself. We are on a planet which is orbiting a star, which is orbiting a galactic core, which is moving in patterns that cannot be understood because the basic rules of physics change at very large or very small scales, and the speeds of those movements to which I just referred begin at beyond the scope of sapient comprehension and rise by multiple orders of magnitude with each level. If you were to, in absolute terms, teleport across the distance between you and me, at the other end of that instantaneous movement you would be light years away and probably adrift in space, left behind by the very motions of the spheres. So in addition to its basic mathematical requirements, teleportation must be calculated using the world itself as a point of reference. This is most readily done by sensing the transition to the space-time curvature caused by the planet's gravity, which itself creates additional complications. One must then account for the mass and motion of, at minimum, the moons, and to be safe, every other celestial object around our sun. And that's before one even begins accounting for other magical effects and proximity. Okay, he repeated, repressing the urge to rub at his temples. What is a light year? Why does that sound like a measurement of time when your use of it in that sentence suggested it's a measurement of distance, and is that related to how you just implied space and time are the same thing? Well, Fanorexa interjected with the greatest eagerness he'd yet seen on her. He had never seen someone so obviously about to launch into a speech. She was even more into it than her mother. And upon consideration, Colin interrupted her interruption. How much of that do I need to know to understand the specific practical issue we're dealing with right now? He has a point, there, Izaroa agreed. I do encourage you to explore the higher mysteries of the universe, husband, but perhaps at another time. I am establishing a baseline, Imar-Alafin stated, shooting her daughter a quelling look. Now you have the beginnings of an idea why teleportation is inherently difficult, husband. Magically speaking, I am a generalist, a specialist in versatility. As a broad rule, you should not allow a generalist mage to teleport you unless it's urgent and an actual specialist is not available. I am an exception to that as to most rules, due to being the greatest mage alive on this continent and possibly at all. She managed to say that in an utterly casual tone, even while sticking her nose physically into the air. The other ameliorating factor is that establishing a stable portal is probably the simplest application of portal magic. And yet, even with those two mitigating circumstances, the other additional problems caused by our situation pose a hurdle that may prove functionally insurmountable. All right, Colin said encouragingly, privately suspecting that this, finally, was the first bit that would prove actually relevant to the question he'd asked her what already felt like a very long time ago. Go on. The issue is, in a word, security. Obviously any magical tunnel connecting our home to some random patch of woods at the far end of whatever dingy little kingdom exists there this week will have aggressive protections of its own. And that is not a problem, I can create those more easily than the tunnel itself. The problem is the other security with which it will interface. First, I am taking it as given that the local end of this putative portal will be in your chambers, husband, because the supplies it produces are for you and more importantly because we're not having that kind of backdoor into our public spaces. Agreed? All 5 other dragons nodded, including Vedaralshi, who had only just been released from the floor. Colin wasn't sure about this logic at all, but decided to pick his battles rather than arguing the right-of-way with all of them simultaneously, so he nodded as well. Then, Imaralafin continued, the portal on its own inherent security will have to interface with the ward network in his chambers, which it goes without saying is designed to prevent intrusions. Didn't he just walk in there? Vedaralshi comments. As, like, an actual plain as beans mortal. Yes, and I have questions about that, Imaralafin agreed, staring down her nose at Colin. He smiled blandly, not about to touch this. After a moment she shorted. Fine, keep your secrets. Heavens know we each have our own. It just goes to show, no security system can ever be perfect. But Atraximos was a defensive thinker and his were as close to airtight as it is possible to be. I presume, further, that a similar level of defensive and concealment magic exists upon this drop point at the other end. Correct? She pointed her nose at Izyroa, narrowing her eyes. The black dragon nodded graciously. Of course. And before anyone bothers to ask, I am happy to consign this to Colin's control. Evidently he is able to seize ownership of dragon-laid enchantments, so upon visiting the site in question he should be able to easily suborn the wards. Right, and that's the issue, Imaralafin continued, flicking her tail irritably. I can tell you that Atraximos's wards were designed not only to repel general intrusions, but specifically any tampering by dragons, and more specifically the dragon most capable of defeating his magical security. I would be astonished if Izyroa's were not likewise focused. Izyroa smiled and said nothing. Imaralafin gave her a long, sardonic look before continuing. So what you are asking is for me to perform the most difficult possible type of magic, integrating new security measures into it in the process, while not only fending off but actively integrating two separate ward networks which are designed to repel me in particular. Izyroa heaved a sigh. Well, if it is beyond your abilities. Oh, spare me your facile provocations, Imaralafin sneered. Obviously it is within my abilities. But you specified a window of 2 weeks, with perhaps a couple of repetitions we can risk before the location is given away and it all becomes moot. What you're describing is a project, something that could keep me occupied for potentially years. Not that I don't relish a challenge, but I thought we specifically needed fast, firm, results? She swiveled her neck to pan a dissatisfied stare around the lot of them, and flicked her tail irritably. Besides, there's no need to dwell on this when a better solution exists. Just have the boy do it. Colin had been about to chime in with the suggestion that he simply remove both ward networks and have her lay fresh ones at both ends, but at this he paused, blinking. Perhaps I have given the wrong impression? I can teleport myself, under incredibly specific circumstances. I certainly don't have the expertise to. Not you, husband, Imaralafin clarified, lowering her head nearly to his level and giving him an amused smile. I am talking about expert help. To do portal magic, we simply need a portal mage. And as luck would have it, Fenorexa is friends with one. Whoa, hold up, stop, Vedaralshi interrupted. Hold everything. I can take obscure dissertations on magical minutiae and theoretical physics. But you're seriously going to stand there and ask me to believe that Fenorexa has friends? Venomax, who had slunk surreptitiously back into the group, grunted in amusement, grinning. To be fair, she said one. A friend, singular. Okay, that's a bit less absurd, granted, Vedaralshi agreed. But come on. Fenorexa bared her own teeth at them. A friend is a person who enjoys your company. Would you like me to explain the theory in more detail? I don't mind coaching you personally. I know the material would be quite abstruse to the two of you in particular. Your idea of coaching is just showing us what book you read about it in, Venomax retorted. I would never do something so rude, Fenorexa said. Unless. Wait. Can either of you actually read? children. Iziro barked. Hush. Imaralafine, are you referring to that wizard who lives nearby? A wizard lives near here? Colin asked. Wait, why would Atraximos have tolerated that? I'm more doubtful that Atraximos would have tolerated one of his offspring befriending a human, said Tiavathyros. Or the reverse, for that matter. I took the time to investigate that mortal myself when he moved into the area, and he seems to like people about as much as Atraximos did. Oh, yeah, he's an asshole, Vadaryl, she agreed cheerfully. I tried to stop in and say hi, too. Most unbearable person I've ever met. Actually, I'm finding it more and more believable that Phanerexa cuddled up to this guy. Phanerexa started toward her, Vadaryl, she puffed up and flared her wings, and Colin reached out with his mind and slammed both of them bodily to the floor. Thank you, husband, Tiavathyros murmured. I can't speak to the boy's disposition or how my daughter got on his good side, said Imaralafine. I just know she has snuck out to visit him with some regularity. She may have fooled Atraximos, but I am, not to put too fine a point on it, smarter than he was. And she may not have tried as hard to conceal it from me since I don't share his simple-minded prejudices. What is actually relevant is that this individual is, indeed, a portal mage. A rather skilled one for his age, if I am any judge. If Colin takes control of the ward networks and manually prevents them from reacting to him while he works, that might suffice to let him at them in peace. I am not actually sure the same would be true for me. It would be just like Atraximos to lay an enchantment that rejected tampering by his own consort even if he asked it to. He really doesn't like to be bothered, though, Phanerexa said, getting back up now that Colin had released her. For a second he'd been worried that he had just sunk his social prospects here, but both sisters seemed to shake it off with no ill will as soon as he relinquished his grip. They really were accustomed to being handled roughly. There's a reason he moved to an inhospitable mountain range where his only neighbor was Atraximos the Dread. You don't hire someone like that. If we go over there asking for a favor, he's just going to cast Hozepful's mocking barrier and stand there being rude. Colin owns the horde of Atraximos the Dread, Iziro said dryly. I guarantee there is something in there which would tempt a wizard out of his solitude. I'll browse through it for some suitably rare doodads, said Colin. Not that I'm an expert on enchanted paraphernalia, but Atraximos kept helpfully detailed notes on everything. He would, Imaralafine muttered, curling her lip. Apparently it falls to me to raise the obvious objections, said Tiavathyros. You are proposing to entrust our security to this mage, whom none of us save Phanerexa know. Is not maintaining our secrecy the entire point of this exercise? I do understand your concern, Iziro said, turning to her and dipping her head. Colin couldn't help noticing that she showed more courtesy to Tiavathyros than Imaralafine as a matter of course. But in this case, pending additional information, I think it will be all right. That this person chose to live so close to us, and that Atraximos allowed it, suggests to me that he is, if not trustworthy, at least not inclined to betray our secrets, nor persuadable. I take your point, Tiavathyros agreed after a moment, nodding. I don't, said Colin. Forgive me if I'm being obtuse, but what about that is reassuring? Doesn't it just suggest that he had some relationship with Atraximos? Atraximos did not have relationships with any mortals, husband, Iziro said in a tone of dark amusement. Ever, period. His loathing of them was personal and universal. That he allowed this wizard to exist in our proximity means two things. He did not consider the man a threat, and he considered him too dangerous to challenge without pressing need. Paradoxical, I know, but that is the only combination of traits which ever prompted him to ignore a mortal in his vicinity. Ergo, Imaralafine added, there's no one he'll be inclined to tattle to, and if it's unlikely anyone could entice or coerce him. This is a portal mage, right? Colin said doubtfully. Isn't that the whole point? Why would someone with that specialty be dangerous enough to scare off Atraximos the Dread? All 6 dragons grinned in amusement, and Kaln found he had already grown sufficiently accustomed to them that the sight was annoying rather than horrifying. It is often asked by the ignorant, Imar-Alafin intoned, which is the most dangerous kind of magic in a fight. There are 2 answers. The first is that the premise of the question itself is invalid, because such contests are almost always decided by whichever mage has the element of surprise, for knowledge of their opponent's skills, and the ability to prepare tailored counterspells. The second answer is portal magic. Give some thought, Kaln, Izyroa added, to what sort of carnage you could unleash with a bit of imagination and the ability to instantly connect any 2 points in physical space. I could do without ever seeing another lake dumped out of the sky onto an army, Tiavathyres murmured, or someone's lungs filled with topsoil. I doubt Atraximos was afraid of him as such, Imar-Alafin added, but even with all his defensive power, a battle like that would have been at absolute minimum incredibly annoying, and quite possibly legitimately dangerous. One does not live to be an elder dragon by picking unnecessary fights with the relatively few opponents who could pose a real threat if they chose. Okay, Kaln said slowly. Then, I guess we have a plan? I would have preferred keeping this in the family, as it were, Izyroa said with a soft huff, but I suppose there's little point in asking Imar-Alafin to handle our magical affairs if we do not take her advice. If she thinks this course is best, we should probably accede. Imar-Alafin sniffed and raised her nose again, but thankfully did not snipe back. Great, Vanomax said sourly. Then will we finally be done accommodating the absurd whims of this creature? Actually, this just squares away his food supply, said Imar-Alafin, grinning at him. Then he needs to do something to placate Tiamat. He what? Tiavathyres demanded. We're assuming it's Tiamat, Kaln clarified. At least, Imar-Alafin is. I know nothing about her. It was during my apotheosis. I survived in part because a deity reached out to help me. The 9 and the local 4 both refused, but she intervened. Did they? Izyroa stated in a terrifyingly neutral tone. Well, this sheds some light on Anassima, at least. If she left you to perish in your moment of greatest need, she may, somewhat reasonably, fear retaliation now that you occupy a seat of significant power, husband. A mere reassurance may suffice to end any hostilities which may be brewing there. About Tiamat I have less advice. She is a very young goddess and extremely specific in her interests. I have never troubled to learn much about her, despite her proximity. Ooh, that's easy. Vadaryl, she said brightly, actually bouncing in place. Tiamat is as sweetie as deities go. We'll just go bring some fresh meat to the hairy tribe I know. They'll probably throw us a festival. You'll like the hairy, Kaln, they're the most sociable little critters. I've been visiting 'em for years. Actually, that should be a lot easier now that the old bastard's dead. He had such a bug under his tail about being nice to people. I think it was the people to which he objected, Phenorexa commented solemnly. Nice is a concept I don't believe he even understood. That'll be tomorrow's business, then, Kaln said. The wizard, I mean, not the hairy. It's too late in the evening to go visiting, but that works out fine. I'll need time to scrounge up something to bribe him with, anyway, and a night's sleep and breakfast first would probably not go amiss. You make this guy sound like something of a trial to deal with. Accurate, Phenorexa said, grinning. I recommend you go alone with Phenorexa, Imar-Alafin added. She is probably the only living person with whom he is on friendly terms. You will need that for an introduction. And conveniently, she will also be able to provide you with transportation. Phenorex's grin instantly vanished. What? You're not suggesting he ride me? Oh, I think you're old enough, Izyroa commented, smiling. Phenorexa turned and hissed aggressively at her. For some reason, so did Vadaryl. Izyroa, fortunately, seemed to find this amusing. As did Tiavathyres. Don't be petulant, Imar-Alafin ordered, thumping her daughter with her tail. Your father is dead and his obsessive antipathies with him, and good riddance to both. There is nothing shameful about carrying someone on your back, if they're worth befriending. You are a dragon. There is nothing shameful about anything you choose to do. The concept of shame is attached to that which is by definition beneath you. Even were he not a godling and head of this family, Colin is a most agreeable mortal. There were parts of that philosophy with which Colin took issue, but he decided this was not the time or place to begin disabusing his new family of any notions of dragon supremacy. "It's most kind of you to say so, my lady wife," he said instead, smiling at her and executing a graceful bow. "Then with that, we have a plan." Chapter 30 The Hoard of Atraximos the Dread contained some truly surprising novelties. Browsing through the contents, Colin discovered that it should be possible for him to assemble an entire kitchen out of various enchanted tools which would be able to do everything from conjuring its own water and banishing waste, to storing food in perpetual freshness and even automatically cooking food without the touch of any hand. Getting all that set up, however, would be at minimum an all-day project, and considering how the various magical parts with entirely different origins and eclectic sources of power would have to be arranged to interact with each other, he'd probably need Imalafine's help to build it without blowing himself up. That was a challenge for another day. For now, Colin brought out a simple brazier of eternal flame and some mundane cookware, mundane in function, though its exquisite design and jewel-accented golden handles were so absurd he failed to imagine anyone rich and out of touch enough to even commission something like this, much less use it. All of it worked, at least. The good news was that he had plenty of food after their visit to the Silver Hound, and it would keep perfectly inside his bag of holding. The bad was that Colin had not been fibbing Iziroa about his cooking skills. That night he reduced several eggs to smoking ruin and ultimately dined on some pastries and candied nuts he'd bought in the roundabout. Breakfast the next morning was a pear and some unseasoned white rice he successfully cooked himself. It was fine. Bland, especially after all the Verdi street food, but wholesome and nourishing, and simple enough that even he wasn't so incompetent as to ruin it. After this uninspiring breakfast, he went for a rinse and brief soak in the bath. The only other family member present that morning was Vidarelshi, and Colin quickly decided to forego future baths if she was already there with no moderating influences. She only stopped trying to dunk him after he turned the tables and forcibly held her underwater. Colin wasn't a forceful person by nature, but he was quickly coming to understand the rough treatment the kids got from their mothers. He didn't think he'd survive living with dragon teenagers if he couldn't manhandle them at need. From there he returned to his chambers, dressed and equipped himself, and stepped back outside, where he paused again to just take in the view of the huge central chamber. It was quite lovely when clean and fully lit. The unobstructed Tameglass really brought out the warm golds and bronzes of the room, a vast improvement over the grey dimness of before. 2 phantom legionaries stood guard on either side of his door, as they did on every door now. Catching sight of another passing through this area and dusting off the wall paneling, Colin did a double take. "Soldier, why are you out of uniform?" The ghost immediately stopped dusting, snapping to attention and saluting him. There she just stood, unresponsive. Oh, of course, they couldn't talk. Just as Colin was wondering what to do about this, a puff of glowing mist appeared and solidified into the Legion's commander, who also saluted him. Then he conjured a heavy book, opened it, and held it up to show Colin one of the pages. At least the letters were clear despite the translucence of the book itself. They helpfully glowed, neat little lines of blue light against the ghostly parchment. Unfortunately, they were in Darashi. So now he had 2 ghosts standing at attention, 4, including the nearby door guards, and no idea what they were trying to tell him. Just as he was about to give up and dismiss them all, Colin suddenly had an idea. Reaching out with his senses, he could detect all the dragons as easily as his own limbs. His wives were all in their chambers asleep. Vidarelshi was swooping around the mountains outside just for fun, Venomax had left the area, probably hunting, and Fenurexa was reading in the library. He focused, flexed his will. Teleportation was supposedly the most difficult kind of magic, but his peculiar divinity clearly gave him a shortcut to it. One he could use only to move to or escape from a dragon. But what if he could invert it? Colin flexed his concentration, and Phenorixa appeared before him. She shot bolt upright, snorting in surprise and peering around. Then her gaze fixed on Colin and her expression changed into an outraged snarl. "You! I was reading, you unrepentant hoodlum." "Hey, it worked," he said brightly. She exhaled a blast of fire at him. It had no effect on Colin, or the ghosts. "Thank you for helping with my experiment, Phenorixa," he said, putting on his most calm and polite demeanor. "That was a huge step. This unlocks some great possibilities. Sorry about the surprise, but I actually need your help with something else. I don't know anyone else who can read classical Darashi." She growled, pointedly baring her teeth, but Colin could tell it was for show. Her ire was already fading, and she needed no more prompting to look at the commander's book. It was worth noting that Phenorixa had even less experience socializing with people than her mother. She might lack some of Imar-Alafine's specific blind spots, but flattery still worked very well when directed at her own weakness. As he had suspected, praising her intellect was the quickest path to results. "Oh. Is this about the soldier's outfit? You can tell that from the book? She's in a different uniform from the others and the commander's here showing you their regulations manual. I do possess the basic ability to interpret context clues, Colin. She's in compliance, if that's what you're worried about. Apparently when posted outside the territory of Amar-Darish, which is everywhere, now, they are to adopt unit-specific uniforms conforming to locally traditional attire for the task to which the soldier in question is assigned, modified to display appropriate insignia, and in Darashi colors. This one is now doing housekeeping work, so she's traditionally attired as a Valeri maid, with a few additions." Colin blinked at her, then at the book, then at the commander and the soldier still at attention. Their spectral skulls gave nothing away, even with the occasional glimpses of mummified flesh that evanesced across them. The colors were washed out by their ephemeral condition, but on a closer look he could see what Phenorixa was talking about. The ghost soldier's uniform had the tight cuffs and high, starched collar of the same shirts they wore under their armor, showing embroidered stripes and pins whose significance he couldn't interpret. She also had braided cords attached to her left shoulder in a doubtless meaningful configuration. Other than that, the soldier now wore a simple long skirt and over that a ruffled apron, embroidered with a large, unfamiliar symbol that he supposed must have been some Darashi heraldry. He had seen domestic servants at both the Renaissance and the Silverhound and Boisford with similar attire. Okay, Colin said slowly. "What kind of regulation is that for an army?" Amar-Darish was a fascinating society, Phenorixa said, now grinning in amusement at his confusion, and clearly too into her role as expositor to hold a grudge over her abrupt teleportation. The only pacifist expansionist empire in recorded history. They were fixated on culture. The Darashi actively and eagerly absorbed rituals, practices, iconography, everything they could from other cultures, and integrated them into their own pluralistic system where they maintained wide diversity under a singular cultural umbrella. I think Iziroa took quite a few ideas from them in setting up Rivak, in fact. At the same time, they exported culture as well, and just gradually absorbed their neighbors. By the time the governments yielded to the inevitable, their nations were functionally Darashi and the transfer of power was all but a formality. Their armies were trained to serve as police, engineers, laborers of all kinds, even diplomats. Amar-Darish sent them out into every country which didn't actively close their borders to them. The legions of Amar would supply disaster relief whenever anything bad happened anywhere, and even make big public works projects in other countries at no cost, all part of their policy of spreading their influence. She paused, turning her head to glance at the two impassive ghost soldiers bracketing the door, then returned her attention to Colin with a wry little grin. Consequently, they were one of the least effective fighting forces of their era, not having been invincible undead at the time, that is. When Amardarsh's borders came up against those of another empire which did not share their slow and steady approach to conquest, it went very badly for them. Which I'm sure provides some context for how this lot ended up the way they did. So, the troops assigned housekeeping duties have modified uniforms of housekeeping staff of the old Valerold Empire, either because this was Valeri territory back in their day, or because it's now Verdi territory and most of the Evervil's nations maintain as many old Valeri customs as they can to prop up their legitimacy. Huh? Colin mused, turning to study the soldier maid again. She was still standing at attention, duster held at her side like a sword. Well, I definitely wouldn't have pieced all that together. Thank you very much, Fenorexa, that was extremely helpful. Knowledge is power, she said smugly. And thank you, Commander, he added. This is all counterintuitive to me, but it seems a fine enough rule and I see no reason to deprive you of your culture. Apologies for the interruption, soldier. Carry on. The commander and the maid both saluted. The former dissolved into mist right before their eyes, while the latter transmogrified her spectral feather duster into a spectral mop and began scrubbing away the scorch marks Fenorexa had just made on the time-stone floor. If that's all, then, the dragon said, already beginning to turn away. Now, wait a second, said Colin. You and I have an errand today, remember? Since we're both here, why not head out? She sighed. I confess I had somewhat hoped you'd forgotten. As I believe I mentioned to you, Colin, I was reading. When aren't you? This'll be a chance to see some practical magic up close. There's plenty of magic in books, she said sullenly. Both literal and otherwise. Mother has so many spellbooks. Come on, Fenorexa. Aren't you like 100 years old? Surely you've read everything in that library by now. She rounded on him, her tail lashing in agitation. That is not how libraries work. A library isn't a novel, you don't just go through it from end to end. I was rereading one of my favorite books, for your information. Weren't you raised in a library? How is this something I actually have to explain to you? Why, yes I was, he said innocently. So that's something we have in common. Except I was raised socially, with a lot of other archivists and orphans in the same training program. You've really missed out on the experience of how we book people rib each other. But don't you worry, I'm here now to make sure you get a properly well-rounded education. Her blue eyes narrowed to slits, bisected by her equally narrowed pupils. You know what? I liked you a lot better when you were all nervous and uncertain. I think you'll find I grow on you. He patted her nose, which made her snort and shake herself in annoyance. Anyway, off to see the wizard. Oh, wait, actually, the success of my earlier experiment gave me an idea I want to try out. Bear with me for a second. Fenorex's eyes widened and she reared up in alarm. Wait. Not waiting, Colin focused and exerted his will again. Right before him, the blue dragon vanished. Reaching out with his senses, he could sense her location, on the front plaza outside the lair on the Dragonvale side. As usual, he was equally able to discern her status and intention, and she was decidedly unhappy. Colin fixed his concentration on her and focused again. The sensation was almost familiar by now. The world blurred around him for a split second and then he was outside, standing right before Fenorexa. In the near distance, the two Phantom Legionaries guarding the door were just returning to attention, probably having raised weapons when a dragon popped out of the air in front of them. Fenorexa whirled and smacked him with her tail, which he barely even felt. Do you have any idea, she snarled, how annoying it is to be spontaneously and non-consensually teleported about? I do not, he readily admitted. But hey, look on the bright side. Based on what you've told me about this wizard we're going to see, I might find out today. You'll get a kick out of watching that, I'm sure. He's more the type to open a portal under your feet and drop you into the bottom of the ocean, or outer space, she warned. I strongly advise you to get over whatever sprightly mood you're in today and go back to that smooth, diffident thing you had going on before. Not that that will impress him, either, but if you actively antagonize this guy it could go quite badly for us all. What will impress him, then? Nothing, she exclaimed. He does not want to see or interact with people. I thought we went over this. Well, I've sifted through the horde and packed up a few things he'll hopefully find enticing, Colin said, patting his bag of holding. All we have to do is not piss him off for the few minutes it'll take me to invoke his mortal avarice. Which I'm assuming he does have? As much as anyone, I suppose, she huffed. Wizards always want more power and knowledge, and he does collect stuff. Seriously, though, Colin said, suiting his words with a more solemn expression. You're friends with this guy. How'd it happen, if he's so unpleasant to everyone and you never want to leave your library? She hesitated, raising her head to glare down at him, the tip of her tail flicking back and forth. Colin just gazed back in perfect calm, waiting. Well, it's not as if we're close, Phenorexa finally said. I started visiting him on a whim. To be honest, at first I got a kick out of the fact that he was annoyed by the interruptions but didn't dare do anything about it. I know we've made a point of how dangerous it can be to fight a portal mage, and that's true, but the same works in reverse. Nobody rational wants to pick a fight with a dragon unnecessarily, and I'm not just any dragon. He definitely didn't want to mix it up with my parents, which is what would have ensued if he did anything serious to me. Ah, Colin said solemnly. Sort of like our dynamic right now, then, in reverse. I guess it's less funny when it happens to you? Phenorexa snorted an annoyed puff of smoke at him, but didn't bother to refute the point. And then it sort of settled in. Don't get me wrong, Shadrach really doesn't like people or appreciate interruptions, but he's also the type to be unnecessarily rude and standoffish to his actual friends. At this point I know he actually does enjoy talking with me, though he still feels the need to be an ass about it every single time. Shadrach, HM, Colin mused. That's our even name. Yes, he's from around there, she said offhandedly. Same general phenotype as you, similar accent. I'd advise you not to try to trade on that to curry favor. Wherever he's from and whatever happened there, it's notable that he left and sought out solitude. Well, I'm certainly sympathetic to that. I also left, remember, and I'm not much more eager to delve into the details. Phenorexa lowered her head to study him from up close. You know, you're eventually going to have to tell us that story. Am I, though? Colin rejoined with a sweet smile, once again patting her nose. She bared her teeth at him. But that's a discussion for another day. For now. Thank you for the rundown, but we should probably be off. We've got a whole day of father-daughter bonding ahead of us. She hissed aggressively at him, which at that proximity still managed to set off a primal surge of terror deep in his hindbrain. Phenorexa might be half the size of his consorts, but with her jaws fully opened this close it was impossible not to notice that he was, at most, 2 bites to her. By this point he was sufficiently used to dragons that he could suppress it without outward reaction. Instead, Colin focused again, and flickered instantaneously through the air, landing astride Phenorex's neck, where he instantly invoked the same magic he'd used previously with Izyroa to secure his seat. This immediately proved important. She jumped in surprise at his landing and spun about, which would otherwise have flung him off. This was both better and worse than riding Izyroa. Her smaller size made her a more convenient mount, but had the downside that her back spines were much closer together. Colin was wedged between the 2 largest, being poked unpleasantly right in the sternum. Being inherently immune to dragons it didn't hurt, exactly, but it wasn't what he'd call comfortable. You're a pest. Phenorexa roared in exasperation, spinning back the other way. What has gotten into you today? I appreciate you, Phenorexa, Colin said, bending to one side to pat her neck. And not just your help today, though thank you for all of that. You remind me a lot of some of my favorite people from back at the archives. I didn't even realize how much I'd missed chatting and joshing with fellow book people. Talking with you makes me feel at home." She paused in her shifting and pivoting, twisting her neck around to look at him directly. In that moment, he could see quite a bit of her mother in her, that same vulnerability to sincere expressions of positive feeling, that uncertainty in the face of genuine emotion. Poor kid. All the book learning in the world didn't prepare you for actual feelings when you met actual people. Colin just smiled at her, silently resolving that he must be careful to use this power for good and not for ill. Phanorexa had the same quality as both of her siblings. They might be older than humans usually live to be, but they were also sheltered, isolated, deprived of experiences. In a word, immature. They all acted like teenagers. He could do a lot to build up her wisdom and self-esteem if he was properly supportive, but by the same token, he could cause some real damage if he was careless or selfish in his dealings with her. Her, and the other two. The absolute last thing Colin needed was traumatized dragons flying around the world with his face attached to their personal childhood terrors. He feared he was already dangerously close to that point with Vanimax. "There it is," Phanorexa grunted after studying him narrowly for a moment. "You really are a smooth talker, Arkansas Colin. Tell me, how much trouble did that get you into back home in Rivkabad?" "It was the source of all my greatest successes," he said with a roguish grin. "And yes, also trouble. Basically all of it. Some people can cause a lot more damage if they like you than if they don't. Life's all about finding the right people to surround yourself with." "Ha!" Her laugh came out as a terse, incredulous bark. "Well, you've certainly failed in that regard." "Nonsense," he replied, smiling. "I like you. You and all the rest. I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you better." "You have terrible judgment." "There's good in everybody, Phanorexa. Or if good is too vague a concept, let's just say there's something interesting about everyone, something that makes it worth hearing their story and learning what makes them tick. I've met some truly awful people, but never anyone who didn't have something to like about them. Just as you like your mother, and your siblings, and this guy Shadrach. Some people are cactus pears, prickly, but worth it." "I don't know why under every uncategorized hell you think I like my siblings." "Maybe I'm projecting, there," he admitted quietly. "It just seems like it'd be awfully sad if you didn't." The dragon turned away from him, stepping forward toward the edge of the platform. "They're useless idiots, both of them. I allow them to live because I wouldn't survive what their mothers would do if I finished them off." Colin patted her scales again. "Well, that just won't do. I guess I have a new project, then." "Oh," she said sourly, "good. Great. That's something to look forward to. Hold on and don't expect a smooth ride. I've never flown with someone on top of me before and I don't even know yet how badly you're going to mess up my aerodynamics." She slammed her wings down and sent them rocketing off the platform, and while Colin might not be an expert, he was reasonably sure she was making this flight rougher than it needed to be. He just held on and let her get it out of her system. They had a long way to go. Tope continued,